This video is for The Living Earth, Unit 4.4, Genetic Disorders and Technology. Today's essential question is, what are the definitions and some examples of autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, and sex-linked disorders? Today, we are diving into a fascinating and important topic in genetics: genetic disorders. These are diseases caused by changes or mutations in our DNA. Sometimes these mutations are inherited from our parents, and other times they happen spontaneously. But regardless of how they arise, genetic disorders can affect many parts of the body. Our cells, organs, and even our development can be affected. We'll focus on three major categories of inherited disorders today. They are autosomal dominant disorders, autosomal recessive disorders, and sex-linked disorders. As we go through these, think about this big question: how does a single change in our DNA lead to such dramatic effects in our bodies? We'll also explore real-world examples like Huntington's disease, Tay-Sachs disease, and color blindness. By the end of this video, you'll understand how genetic disorders are inherited, why certain conditions appear more in certain populations, and how modern technology like karyotyping and genetic counseling can help families manage these risks. Let's begin with autosomal dominant disorders. To understand these, remember that humans have two copies of most genes, one from each parent. So if a disorder is dominant, it means that even one mutated copy is enough to cause the disease. This is like flipping a coin, because if one parent has the dominant disorder, each child has a 50% chance of inheriting the faulty gene and then developing the disorder. So some examples. Huntington's disease is a classic example of an autosomal dominant disorder. It's caused by a mutation where a sequence of nucleotides, which we call a repeated nucleotide, is duplicated too many times within a gene. Even if only one allele for this Huntington's disease mutation is present, the person will eventually develop Huntington's, which causes the brain to degenerate over time, often leading to personality changes and loss of control over movement. Neurofibromatosis type 1 is another example. This condition is caused by a mutation in the gene responsible for making neurofibromin, which is a protein that helps control how cells divide. Without it, non-cancerous growths, which we call neurofibromas, can form on top of nerves, and skin anomalies may appear. Now, symptoms can vary. Some people have just mild skin spots, while others may develop tumors near critical areas like the optic nerve. If a tumor grows on the spinal cord, for example, it can compress nerves, which leads to pain, numbness, or even paralysis. Marfan syndrome happens when there's a mutation in the fibrillin-1 gene. Fibrillin is a protein that helps build connective tissue. So, when it's faulty, problems show up throughout the body. People with Marfan syndrome tend to have long arms, legs, and fingers, and they're at risk for heart problems like aortic aneurysms, as well as lung issues, eye disorders, and even learning disabilities. Other autosomal dominant disorders include Lynch syndrome. This disorder affects DNA mismatch repair genes, which usually act as the proofreading tools for our DNA. But when these genes are broken, cells accumulate mutations that they otherwise would not, and this often leads to colorectal cancer. Hereditary multiple ectosis can cause bony tumors that grow from the skeleton. Scientists know that at least 3 different genes can mutate to cause this, but they're still figuring out exactly how these mutations lead to the growth of these bone tumors. So remember, in autosomal dominant disorders, just one mutated gene is enough to cause the disease. And typically, if one parent has the disorder, each child has a 50% chance of inheriting it. Next, let's talk about autosomal recessive disorders. These are quite different because a person must have two mutated copies of the gene, one from each parent, in order to develop the disorder. If they have just one mutated copy, they are a carrier. They don't show symptoms, but can pass the mutation to their children. So here are some examples. Sickle cell disease happens when both copies of the hemoglobin gene are mutated. This mutation causes red blood cells to form a sickle shape, which makes it harder for them to carry oxygen and can block blood vessels, leading to pain and organ damage. Cystic fibrosis affects a gene that produces a protein which is responsible for moving salt in and out of cells. Without it, thick mucus builds up in the lungs and digestive tract, leading to breathing problems and infections. Tay-Sachs disease is a heartbreaking condition caused by a mutation in the gene that makes an enzyme which normally breaks down a type of fat in nerve cells. Without it, the fat builds up, damaging the brain and the nervous system. Tay-Sachs usually starts in infancy and leads to death by age 3 to 5. It's especially common in people of Eastern European Jewish ancestry. About 1 in 27 people in this population carry the mutation. Spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, is a group of autosomal recessive disorders that cause progressive muscle degeneration. Babies with SMA may have trouble breathing and eating, and the condition usually leads to death by age 2 or 3. Let's think critically. If two parents are carriers for an autosomal recessive disorder, what are the odds their child will have the disorder? Hopefully you guessed 25% for each child. Now let's shift gears to sex-linked disorders. These are genetic conditions caused by mutations on the X or Y chromosomes. Since females have 2 X chromosomes and males have 1 X and 1 Y chromosome, the inheritance patterns look different for each sex. For X-linked disorders like red-green color blindness, the condition is more common in males. But why is it more common in males? Because males only have 1 chromosome, if they inherit an X chromosome with the mutation, they don't have a backup. Females, on the other hand, with 1 affected X are usually just carriers because they have 1 healthy X that can compensate. 2 rare and severe X-linked disorders include Rett syndrome, which mainly affects females because it's usually fatal for males. It causes problems like poor hand use, speech delays, and social difficulties. In severe cases, it also affects breathing and muscle control. Incontinentia pigmenti, which also mainly affects females and is usually lethal for males. It causes skin discoloration, hair and tooth abnormalities, and can affect the nervous system, leading to seizures and developmental delays. For Y-linked disorders, remember that only males have a Y chromosome, so these disorders only affect males. A father with a Y-linked mutation will pass it on to all of his sons. One example is Y chromosome infertility, where missing genes on the Y chromosome lead to low sperm counts, poor sperm motility, or even no sperm production at all. So let's test this understanding. If a father has a Y-linked disorder, what percentage of his sons will inherit it? Hopefully, you guessed 100%. And lastly, let's talk about technology and how it helps us understand and manage genetic disorders. One important tool is karyotyping. This process involves creating a visual picture of a person's chromosomes, which allows scientists and doctors to identify abnormalities, like extra or missing chromosomes. For example, karyotyping can reveal conditions like Down syndrome, where there's an extra chromosome 21, or Turner syndrome, where a female has only 1 X chromosome instead of 2. Another key resource is genetic counseling. Families who have a history of genetic disorders can meet with specialists to understand the risks of passing on a disorder. Counselors can explain inheritance patterns, recommend testing, and help families make informed decisions, especially when considering having children. But we also need to think about the ethical side of genetic testing. It raises questions like, who gets access to this information? How can we protect people's privacy? Could this lead to discrimination by employers or insurance companies? These are all complex issues that scientists, doctors, and society must navigate very carefully. In summary, genetics is a powerful tool, but it's essential to use it thoughtfully, balancing the benefits of knowledge with respect for individual rights. At this point, you should be able to generate a full and appropriate response to today's essential question. What are the definitions and some examples of autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, and sex-linked disorders?